Well, while Canadian premiers eat island oysters and brag about doing something that took 17 months to bring down interprovincial trade barriers, because life is local, Myers and MacNeill is on task this week, and we are delighted to have former MLA Hannah Bell come in and talk to us today. Hannah is the interim executive director of the PEI Coalition for Women's Leadership. And the reason that we think that this conversation is imperative and relevant today is PEI in the District 16 by-election, which Kate Willows won. PEI jumped to 30% of the provincial legislature as female, which sounds great, but we're still second last in the country. So we want to talk about barriers, potentials, what needs to change. So Hannah, welcome to Because Life is Local. Delighted to have you here.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here too. It's great to get a chance to chat to you both and be part of this. It's been really fun sort of listening in on your podcast over the last few weeks as you've kind of explored some great topics. And so, yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here.
So tell us about the Coalition for Women's Leadership. What is it and what do you do?
So as an organization, it's been around for 20 years. It was originally a volunteer organization, and it was the PEI Coalition for Women in Government. It rebranded a couple of years ago to expand its mandate, partly because people thought it was a government organization, which is always a bit challenging, but it's a non-partisan organization that does exactly what it says. The role of the organization is to promote and support women to get into positions of leadership, which obviously includes elected positions, but also to look at some of the broader issues and challenges that women face, either getting into those positions or that they experience while they're in those positions. So that includes things like supporting women who are elected or want to be elected in municipal politics, as well as provincial and federal. But a lot of the work we've been doing recently has been really focused on gender-based violence, and in particular, the violence that's experienced by women online in the digital spaces. So a lot around self-defense, digital self-defense, prevention, and responding to the real issues that come with our current world of, AI and social media and all the things that come with it.
Before we get into sort of the provincial politics, I'm interested immediately in the municipal government piece, because that literally is the foundation of democracy in this province. And it is the most accessible level of government because it's the only one where people get to walk into a room and say something. And at least in Three Rivers, but we're seeing it around the province. Municipal councillors are being held up to be accountable for things that have nothing to do with their jurisdiction. And there's a lot of sort of spinning little cyclones of confusion in the public realm. What's your thought about municipal governments and women in municipal governments as it relates to the current environment?
Well, I think you make the point there that it's the most accessible for people to get into in terms of, it's an entry point for people to come into politics because it's not as political. It's not driven by political parties, right? In PEI, municipal politics are not party aligned, at least not overtly. But it's also one of those entry points in terms of sort of, there are less barriers to get in. There's less cost to get in. There's less time potentially commitment, though we certainly don't see that with a lot of municipal politics in PEI. And so as a result, there's more women often in positions in municipal politics than in other spaces, but it's also the one that has the least barriers in terms of the public access. And, one of the biggest things that we're seeing from the experience of people who are elected is that this is not what they signed up for. They signed up because they wanted to do good work in their community, because they care about their communities and they have stuff to do. They're stepping up, and instead they're being harassed, they're being defamed, they're being threatened. They're not able to get their work done, and it's really disheartening, and it's not something that would encourage other people to want to step forward when they see what a council meeting looks like and it disintegrates into chaos, or they see what people talk about online. And so that's why the work that we do is so important. We support people who are already elected. What do they need for themselves, for their own safety, but also what recommendations can we make on a broader scale? So for instance, with the Federation of Municipalities or directly with municipalities themselves to make those spaces safer. So a code of conduct, for example, is something that we're really working on right now, because the code of conduct doesn't take away people's rights, but it sets the expectations. and it sets the boundaries of what is and is not acceptable and what the consequences are.
Give me an example of what that might look like.
So a code of conduct might set out what is considered appropriate behavior in a public meeting and what would be considered harassment. And it would refer to the legal definitions of harassment. So, there are very clear guidelines on terms of language and behavior. And if that's made public and everybody adheres to that, then that means you've got something you can refer to when you need to ask somebody to stop speaking, or you need to ask them to moderate their behavior.
So it's a tool in the toolkit for a chair.
Absolutely. And a lot of the work that we do without being able to do things like change laws or affect, like sweeping policies is about affecting change through changing behavior. Yeah. Or providing people with tools to change their behavior.
That's a nice segue. And Stephen, I think we've set a record for not bringing you in on this. But
I know. I'm giving everybody the silent treatment.
Our ratings are going up. Hannah, you jumped into politics in 2017 in a by-election in District 11. What was the lay of the land like in 2017 for female entering politics? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but does Pete have a reasonable track record of electing females in this province? Yeah. I know we hold up the big five and that type of thing, but what's your general feeling of how we've done over the years?
Well, I put this in our press release recently. We've elected over 1,200 members since 1873. We've elected 38 women in that time. It's 3%, right? So no, we were the last province in the country to elect a woman. We've only just hit that 30%, so we're second last in the country now. And there's a lot of reasons why, and we could certainly get into a lot of them, but there are just barriers that are the same across the country, not just in PEI, that prevent women from getting into politics and from being nominated, from having the freedom to be able to run, because there is a certain amount of freedom that you have to be able to take on this risk with the weirdest job interview process in the world, which is, an election. And then there are, challenges in terms of the system itself. So
in 2017, the Greens were on the rise. They had one MLA, Peter Bevan Baker. Had you thought for a long period of time that you want to try to be a provincial representative?
Well,
you hadn't.
No.
So what actually happened for you to get that nomination? Did Peter approach you?
I had been, an advisor and a member of the a member of the party at that point to provide sort of support, technical. I have an MBA and with expertise in management and economics, so I was providing information, support in terms of things like finance, policy, and that kind of piece. And when Doug Currier resigned very suddenly, obviously it was my district, and it was just shocking. He resigned on a Friday morning, and everybody knew it was coming, and everything. And I was just as shocked as everybody else, and went, "Oh, okay, that's interesting," and just kept on with my day. But unlike many women, when they're asked to run, Peter Bevan Baker reached out to me, and I said no. No, I've got a job. I'm not going to do that. And that's often the very first reaction often you get from women when they're asked to run is they say, "Gosh, no, not me. I couldn't do that. What are you thinking?" I think there's some statistic somewhere that says women have to be asked multiple times, sometimes up to 7, 9 times before they'll say yes. So that's because women are much more risk averse. We have much more to lose. I was working for a nonprofit organization, which like I am now, as the executive director for the PEI Business Women's Association, which was, again, a nonpartisan organization. So by running, I lost my job. If I hadn't won, I would have been unemployed. So I was, because there's no way that I could remain in that role, having clearly identified myself with a political party. No, that's not legal. It's actually against it's human rights violation. But that's how PEI works, right? So there are big risks involved. So that it was a very large risk for me to run.
I want to jump in here for
go ahead, Stephen.
one second. Because Paul and I had this discussion not that long ago about the vacancy in the Liberal leadership, and we immediately jumped to Dan Kuchar. And then later on, we had a conversation like, why did we do that? Why aren't we looking at the strong women, which there are plenty of, who could fill that role and be good premiers? And I just want to touch on the point you make. And I think it takes women a long time to make that decision, or they have to be asked a lot. Men think they could fly the space shuttle. Like if you asked a man, say, would you pilot the space shuttle? They're like, I think I could figure it out. I think I can figure it out. So men are ready to jump because they think they can do anything, even if they can't. Like men are probably too overconfident when it comes to absolutely everything. So like, how do we get ourselves to look in the right direction instead of looking for the quick guess or the strong man versus the strong woman? Because I think we'd be better served
and it's a really good point.
looking at it.
So you heard me talk about a systemic issue, right? This is a cultural issue. This is something that you actually have to actively recognize and then actively work to overcome. So you talking about it is a huge piece of it right there. But there's a couple of big considerations. One of them is, like I said, women are just as competent and just as confident when they are in that space. You have to have not only them see themselves in that space, but you also have to have the support of other people to see them in that space. So in the same way that you first went to Dan rather than Carolyn, even though the competency is completely parallel, there is a default, particularly with sort of traditional political parties, to look to traditional faces, traditional skill sets, traditional roles, and the people that we know. So we go within our own networks. Like we make so many decisions based on who we know and who we feel comfortable with. And so, what do we do to address that? Well, there's some kind of not so fun, but very useful things like having a requirement to have 50% of your candidates be women, to have a requirement that you think about equity when you're looking at putting a slate of candidates together or when you're looking for candidates, but also the decision makers stop and think, like what do we actually need? The other part of that too is the public themselves aren't going to make that shift of seeing that women are as competent as leaders until they see more women, because it's a chicken and egg thing, right?
Let me ask you both of this. At least in the old line parties, the PC party has a very good track record of treating female leaders roughly. Yep. Both Olive Crane and Pat Mello were basically forced out of their job because the old boys club determined that they were not capable of getting the party to where they wanted to go. So, Stephen, let me ask you this first. Sure. You were part of sort of the inner process of those, at least one of them. I don't know about Pat Mello. What was driving those type of conversations? And is it groupthink? Does no one stand up and say, wait now, our bigger issue is this?
Well, I mean, in the Olive one, there was clear sides. Like it was a deep divide in the party because remember the vote at the leadership review was very close. I think she had 54 or 52% of the vote or something like that. But it's not extremely dissimilar to what's happening today with Rob. Like people will start going to him if they haven't already and saying, I think you should step aside, and then it'll grow and it'll grow and it'll grow.
The difference between Crane and Lance is Lance has sort of muddled his way through 17 months of lack of achievement, and his caucus is still uniformly locked in step, which blows my mind.
Yeah, I guess we had a very small caucus in the Olive Crane days, and I think she did have a lot of support in the caucus, but it was small, and there was a big faction of the party that was on the other side of it, and it was a constant push.
Hannah, do you want to jump in on that, or whether females are sort of had to meet a different bar of success, at least in the old line parties?
Well, I mean, I don't have the personal experience, but I can speak, just the observation, which is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a pervasive line of questioning competence with women and when they're in positions of authority, which often isn't grounded in anything other than just, you can't hack it. Right. So, and that gets a lot worse if you are, a woman with children, or, if you are a caregiver or anything, because any accommodation that you might ask for is seen as weakness. So there's a strong correlation with women are weak. We hear it even now. Like I think when Tate was elected, one of the first questions she was asked by a reporter on election night was, how are you going to cope as a young mother? How are you going to balance your workload? I mean, like, Stephen,
I thought it was really powerful that she brought her kids to the. I thought it was really powerful that she brought her kids to the party that night, or the watch party.
Yeah, because my daughter came to all of those. My daughter was there for election night, like both times, and she came with me to absolutely everything.
So are the rules and policies of the legislature set up to allow sort of Tate Willows would be, to my mind, sort of the mold of the type of person we want to be attracting to the provincial legislature. Young professional family here for the long haul. I don't care what party you're from, but you will have a different view of the world than a white old guy like me, who's sort of been around for decades and think I know everything.
Well, I didn't say that.
Oh no, I'd say it myself.
Listen, the whole point of electing women, of electing people of color, of electing, anyone who reflects diversity of what the island actually looks like means that they bring their lived experience with them. So in the same way that when I was elected, it was the first time we had somebody who could speak about working in a nonprofit, or like working directly with homelessness and poverty. It changes dialogue, right? So when you bring that diversity of experience in, you are going to build a better legislature. But let's be clear, there is no job description officially for an MLA. There are very limited definition of duties, and like basically make sure you take your seat. But you can't fire an MLA. They can be not elected again, but they can't be fired unless. I mean, the only thing Stephen can correct me, but I think it's only on like actual criminal charges that an MLA can be or death that an MLA can be removed from their seat. And there's no job description. There's also no job protection, right? Like people don't realize, and this is something that's come up a lot more, as different experiences have happened for MLAs more recently in the legislature. There's no job protection. There's no kind of description of sort of what your minimum job duties are. There's no workplace safety. You don't have EI. You don't have employee assistance. You don't have kind of basic things that most people in workplaces take for granted are not there for MLAs. So talking about something like childcare is so far down the list when it should be, it should be a priority. I mean, look at the fight we have just to change the hours of the legislature to align more with the school calendar. It was like 3 weeks of debate to get that small change made. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that often when people are signing up to run, they actually don't know that until they get in.
What surprised you most when you first entered the legislature?
I think it was that absence of like what is the job. Like you get the training from the staff in the speaker's office and the legislative assembly staff who are fantastic, who sort of go through generally here's how things work, which is like a day, but sort of, what is the actual job? And a lot of that job is defined by how people did it before. So kind of finding your way into sort of what does that look like? And obviously it's different when you're in opposition or you're in a third party versus being in government, because you also don't get resources. You remember when I was elected, Peter previously had been in the office in the basement with like one staff person. And then my election, they literally didn't even have anywhere for me to sit. I was sitting in the speaker's spare office for like 3 weeks because there was no office.
So there's two levels to that, though. There's the job of being an MLA, being part of the government. There's and being part of a party, and there's the job of an MLA in a constituency.
Yes.
And driven primarily, how do I get reelected? So they go out with certificates for 40 or 50 year whatever, 20 year whatever. They show up everywhere and have their picture taken. Stephen's scowling already.
You won't find many pictures of me. You won't find many pictures of me.
No.
Well, not their big cake candidate.
But my point is the party will largely dictate, correct me if I'm wrong, the party will largely dictate what an MLA does within the legislature. And then the MLA gets to decide in the constituency how they want to present, how they want to represent. Stephen, you want to jump in on that?
I do, because I think, anybody from our party who's listening, if I agreed that they determined what I did in the legislature, would be laughing, because I did what I wanted, and I represented the people who I thought I needed to represent all the time.
But let's be honest, the last 17 months within your party is a prima facie case for lemmings. Political lemmings, just follow the leader.
We've had this discussion here about you got to elect people who know that their job is to represent you. That's what it comes down. It's not to represent the party. It's not to answer to a premier's office or to a leader. Like there has to be some sort of hierarchy, yes, but like you have to be able to have your say. It's not the leader doesn't get to determine the whole direction of a party. That's ridiculous, because if they're bad, then you all get dragged down that hole. and you should get to be yourself. And then when you get into the conversation about having different genders or colors, or they have to be able to represent what's true to them too. They have to be able to be authentic to them rather than answer to a party. So I probably struggled with that. I probably had a lot of staffers who maybe still don't like me, but hey, I got elected for 14 years, so whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's I think it's one of those real challenges as well, because until you're like, again, it's like what we don't know until you get there. Like the different pulls on you in that elected role, right? Like you said, you're elected as a member of a party, which has, positions and policy, which are often driven, through the leader as the kind of setting that direction. You have caucus, which has its own dynamics. And then you have that legislative role. So, I worked a lot on bringing forward legislation. I was really clear about using that role to kind of affect change through making amendments and new legislation. And then you have your constituency piece. So, it's a big job, and maintaining the balance between which bits are yours and which bits are somebody else's, and how you maintain your authentic commitment. I ran because it was an opportunity to do something bigger, to have a bigger impact in the spaces. And you both know that I brought forward and championed things that were really difficult and made people really uncomfortable, including, people I worked with, like Stephen said. But you're not there to make other people feel comfortable. You're there to do the work that people want you to do and to speak about the things that they care about. And I think if one of the big pulls, one of the biggest balance challenges with politics is the job of a politician is to get reelected. But I would argue that you can do both, right? That you can be a good politician who affects change, and you can, through that, be somebody who is more likely to be reelected.
The one piece of government that most Islanders would be most aware of, I think, is question period. But anyone who watches politics really intently realizes the question period has the least to do with governing. It's for me as a member of the media, it's for Compass, it's for MLAs sort of preening for the crowd. But here's the question. In your realities as MLAs, you both stood up and pretended that you were angry at someone, and you raised your voice strongly. And then probably afterwards you went out and had a social conversation with the person that you were talking about. Was it different, Hannah, for you, or more difficult for you to walk in and be productive in that environment than perhaps Stephen, whose, background is baseball and sports, and it just sort of became an extension of the ball field?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think I did as an MLA was show consistently in a lot of different ways how it could look different. So, I mean, I think Stephen will probably recall this. I got really good at question period at asking really difficult questions politely, right? And a large chunk
terrifying. It was terrifying.
Yeah. I would, yeah. And I mean, and I think Kerry Campbell, I think I even had it made into a poster in my office. Kerry Campbell once said that I politely bludgeoned, I think it was Brad Trivers, politely bludgeoned him with my questions. I put a lot of thought into it, and a large chunk of it was don't play into the stereotypes. So I would not lose my temper, and I would be like very, very clear and very, very scary, and usually I would know the answer of what I was asking. So I played that game to make it work for what I wanted to achieve, which meant that, I was asking hard questions, which means other people could then ask hard questions, which would create a media story, which would allow us to sort of create something that had impact. So I tried to use QP as a way not to score points, but to get something done.
Stephen, you use QP in a different way. I mean, you sort of raised to an art the ability to become morally outraged at anything on both sides of the legislature. And you, by the way, Hannah, I don't know. I'm going to assume, Hannah, that you read Green Party electoral platforms. You may have even authored them. You're sitting beside a person who said he'd never read a party platform. So, Stephen, I'm not going to let you answer that question again, but I would like you to answer, is that sort of just how you do it, or is that a guy's thing? Or, because a lot of male members of the legislature traditionally tried to do that.
Yeah,
Pat Binns would have been an outlier in that, I think. You rarely ever saw Pat raise his voice.
no, I think so. First, I just want to touch on Hannah because I thought she was really effective in question period. And I think for me, I remember the time that Hannah you became my critic. I went to caucus and I'm like, oh, Jesus, now what? Like, how's this going to work? Like, I'm going to her questions. She's going to know what she's talking about. She's probably going to be right. And I can't push back on her like I was on Peter. So I'm like, I'll have to find a tactic that's going to keep me in the clear space here and not get beat up. So I found it really difficult to switch. But to answer your question, Paul, I think and what there's two things I used to use it for. One is to give Dennis more space sometimes. So like get question period back in order by turning it into like crazy town. So then they're like, okay, let's bring it back down. And then the questions became more easy and Dennis became less the target. So partly that. And I partly used to use, and Hannah, you might remember me doing this, like it was to keep everybody on tilt. Like sometimes Peter would ask me questions and I'd just hammer him. And then the next day he'd ask me questions and I'm like, that's a great idea. I think let's do it. So nobody knew what they were going to get from me. So it was like that you couldn't create an ebb and flow in question period because I wouldn't allow it because no one knew what Stephen they would get on any given day. And Sidney McEwen used to laugh at me. He's like, it's just crazy watching because even we don't know which Stephen is here today. But both might show up because I get questions from Steve Howard and hammer him, and then I get questions from Lynn London. I'd be nice to her, and everybody's like, "What the hell's going on?" So, like,
I think they thought you were dating.
we weren't.
Listen, we're starting to get deep. We've got as much time as we need for this, but I think we should delve into, if we had a magic wand, what would you do to change political parties? Because,
Oh, wow.
nominations aren't won by people who are thoughtful with great CVs a lot of time, who could be great policy wonks as an MLA or whatever. They're won by people who can get 75 votes out or whatever the number is. So I've always seen that as an impediment to the system. But I'd like your thoughts generally, each of you, on how political parties should be looking to change to make the legislature a better place, a more equitable place. Stephen, you want to lead off?
Sure. I've often thought about this. Like, I've been to Nunavut and I've seen their consensus model, and I always kind of liked it. They don't have parties. They're really doesn't really work like that. And the premier gets selected from inside their own ranks. It's more like a municipal council. So,
The Welsh legislature is built on a circle.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's no party.
Yeah.
There's no party. I
There's
think
no head of the two.
the party system might be part of the problem. I know I say that I did quite well on
Do you
it.
think?
I think I did quite well on it, but yeah, I don't know how you would fix a party. Like, I don't think any of them are fixable personally, but maybe Hannah does.
Did you think the Greens? I'm not going to ask Hannah this because I know you can't get political on parties, Hannah, given your current title. But do you actually see the Greens as similar to the Liberals and Tories?
No, party's a party. I mean, they may have different rules, but they, at the end of the day, it's still leader driven. They still all vote together and band together. Like, it's still if they're a government, everybody's going to defend their policy. They'll all, like, it's just the system is set up that they can't be anything but that.
Okay, Hannah, what would you change?
I mean, I'd agree with Stephen that we're talking about like in a blue sky thing. You're talking about the party system itself is the problem. Also, I will obviously make a case for how, like, the first past the post system, obviously, it reinforces that adversarial positioning, right? So, but as long as you've got them and us, you're going to have a conflict-based space. But making the shift from like the Westminster system to something else is hard, right? Because it's embedded it's a cultural thing for us. I think one of the things that is making a change that maybe is less obvious is just that the changing demographics of the island are changing the traditional alignments of party systems. We've seen a drop in the voter turnout, and that correlates somewhat to the changes in our population having more people from away, whether they're from, other places in Canada or from international destinations. And so civics education is another really huge piece about people understanding how important their vote is in terms of voting for ideas and voting for policy, like whatever you want to call it, but voting for good ideas versus what color the team is. And then who is the person that you think could best represent the things that you care about. And we are seeing that happen, like we are seeing that when people like Tate get elected and Carolyn get elected, that they're there talking about ideas and about what they care about and about how much they care about their community and about what color their party is.
Do you think, like Stephen and I have talked about Carolyn Simpson numerous occasions, and she had a really spectacular session in terms of her ability to hold government accountable and push them in certain directions. Do you think if one came up to you and said, "I'm interested, doesn't matter party," what would your advice be?
Well, that's actually part of my job. So we provide nonpartisan support to anyone who's interested in running at any level, and those conversations are private and confidential. But basically, it's I have a whole checklist of support. But my initial thing is, who do you have in your corner? Right? You can't do this on your own, and you shouldn't do this on your own. So who do you have in your corner, and who do you need in your corner? Who do you have who's going to be able to give you the support you need, whether it's, like financial support or emotional support? What do you know, and what bits do we need to fill in? And then the other thing, more and more, that the advice I'm giving is, how do we keep you safe? How do we keep you safe? Because we're not going to pretend that this is a safe thing to do in lots of ways, right? Like whether it's your actual physical safety, your safety online, your emotional safety, all of those pieces. So it is not an easy decision to make, but it's one where there are lots of tools available, but it's also one people need to go into with their eyes open.
Thank you. Maybe the last question, you, Stephen. Do you think we're at the start of a curve where, sort of through osmosis, the PEI electoral system will change, so it's less a stranglehold of the backrooms of the Liberals and Tories, and, those parties are going to have to figure out how to operate in a more diversified Prince Edward Island? Or am I just pipe dreaming there? That they still think hardcore that, they may lose one election, the Greens may come up, but ultimately it's a two-party fight for the long run.
Oh, I don't know. That's a tough one. I think we're seeing significant change. Like there's a lot less party affiliation in the younger categories for sure. Like people are free to vote, and they're not necessarily just tied into the family tree of how to vote. So I think that will change things. I do think the diversity we see, because we see it everywhere across the island now, of new cultures coming in, that will impact it. But I think if you look across Canada, the parties have figured out ways to make that work too, because there's quite a bit of diversity in the caucuses of all the parties federally now, and that's generally from people in the areas where there's a higher concentration of immigration over a longer period of time. So that's who they had to pick, because that's who represented those people better. So I think we'll see some of that. I don't know how it's going to affect the party system. Like I thought in the early days that the Green Party would be here and gone. It was actually when Hannah got elected that I was like, yeah, I'm probably wrong. So like, I think we'll see it grow into a deeper three-party system than even it is today. Like more people will start identifying themselves clearly as Greens because there's something to attach themselves to because they're elected, and they say things that represent the voices, so people will get attracted to what they're hearing. So I think what the back rooms of the two bigger parties of the old parties need to start looking at is the reality of this is how it's going to be now versus it's going to be gone and we're just going to be back to trading back and forth.
And I feel obligated to give you the last word today. So how would you like to wrap this up?
Well, I mean, I think it's really important for us to talk about sort of that things are changing. And like Steve said about, the two parties sort of doing the same things, is that they're not paying attention. Like things are changing. And so whether you like it or not, you can either kind of be with that and ready to go with it, or you can watch it sail on by and suffer the consequences. So, we achieve change by being brave. And, when we have people like Carolyn and Tate, stepping up into spaces that don't necessarily welcome them, but make it work and come forward like they have. It gives other people hope because they can see that it's possible in the same way it was when I was elected. And so, I'm really hopeful that people behind the scenes in party systems are going to think about this a bit more and be more open to, organizations like mine coming in and saying, we've got some ideas that might make this work better for you. Because it's not about what party people represent. It's about, like I said, representatives speaking for the voice of their community. And so, anyone that's willing to do the work to make that happen, we should support, regardless of what color of their flag flies.
Hannah Bell, let's leave it there. It's been an absolute delight to have you on Myers and MacNeill Because Life is Local, episode 14.
14.
Unbelievable. This is available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, PEICanada.com. Support local journalism because local journalism matters because we get to tell stories like we have today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you both.